Hey everybody, before we start the show, I want to let you know about one of the sponsors for this week's Tabletop Babble. I'm talking to you about Kobold Press. You know these people. They are amazing. They are the third-party design company founded by Kobold-in-Chief Wolfgang Bauer, who's an amazing game designer. They've put out great products like the Midgard campaign setting, Tome of Beasts for 5th edition D&D, Deep Magic, the Kobold Guides 2. The list goes on and on. They are incredible. You should check out these products. Well, now, today, we are talking about the latest and greatest product from Kobold Press. I am talking about Kadeem Genies, a PDF and print book available through the Dungeon Masters Guild. You can expand the options for Kadeem, which is in the Forgotten Realms, or your homebrew campaign with this amazing PDF. It's got more than 20 new genies, includes Minor Gen, Huge Sandstorm, and Oasis genies, and Tasked Genies, a template for bottled genies available in both PDF and print. Much more. You should check it out right now on the DMs Guild. There's a direct link to this on our site, or you can just go to the DMs Guild and search for Kobold Press or Kadeem Genies, and you will find it. It is amazing. Oh man, I am so glad to have this. Thank you so much. If y'all know Wolfgang Bauer, Kadeem is one of his passions. It's this amazing Arabian Nights style world within the Forgotten Realms. Oh, it's so cool. I've been wanting content like this since the DMs Guild came out. I was hopeful for a Kobold Press Kadeem product, and now we finally have it, and it is just as good as imagined. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am chatting with Jim Johnson, who helped create the Star Trek Adventures RPG that came out earlier this year. If you have not played this game, you should check it out. It is pretty incredible. You can play in any era of Star Trek. We're going to talk to Jim about that, and we're going to talk a lot about adventure design. He plays a big role in their organized play program, as well as in their sort of overall adventures line. So let's get to my interview with Jim. Okay, everybody, I am here with a great game designer, Jim Johnson. Jim, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Hey folks, I'm Jim Johnson. I am a freelancer, so I write a lot of fiction, nonfiction. I do a lot of game writing, not a huge amount of game writing. I've been mostly focused on Star Trek Adventures over the last year and a half, going on, almost 2 years now. And I've dabbled in other games. I've worked on Decipher's Lord of the Rings game, almost worked on Decipher's Star Trek game, Shadowrun, a couple other little ones. So not super well known in the RPG field, but I find my niches and then I do as good a job as I can with them.
Well, I have a feeling that that is going to change. Star Trek Adventures has sort of broken through the zeitgeist, and I think a lot of people are excited about it. Obviously, there's a big overlap between the fan bases of role-playing games and the fan bases of Star Trek. And Star Trek sort of allows for something different than the normal D&D Pathfinder-y sort of role-playing game, or even a Star Wars role-playing game experience. What is it about Star Trek that you are such a big fan of? Because and we've talked about this before coming on the show, I'm not like a huge Star Trek guy, so I'd love to know like what makes Star Trek great for you.
Oh gosh, well, so I've been a Star Trek fan really all my life. I mean, Star Trek's been on for 50 years, and I'm 40 something, so I've known Star Trek really since I was a little kid. You know, watching reruns on a little tiny black and white TV screen, and I think the optimism for the future and the hope and the diversity and the overall positive atmosphere that's in Star Trek is just inspiring. And I think, you know, the classic kind of space opera where, you know, bad things can happen to good people, but at the end of the day, you're still striving to be something better than yourself. And you're working with a team of people that are diverse and interesting and boldly going forth into the world, into the universe, and exploring strange new worlds and new civilization. I mean, that's great. It's just so much for me personally. It's just so much more interesting than blowing up a bunch of stormtroopers and fighting a galactic empire, right? I mean, nothing wrong with that. I certainly love Star Wars because I was in the Star Wars generation too. But there's a whole philosophy behind Star Trek that just really really appeals to me as a gamer and a person and a storyteller, and everything else is all. It's like the whole package, you know.
Totally, yeah. I think there's a lot going on, and Star Trek has so many layers to it and so
Yeah.
many interesting stories within its universe. And I love the fact that there are, entire episodes that take place just on the ship among the crew, right? That are really interesting and fascinating. And then there are entire episodes where, they're going to different worlds and big action set piece things are happening. It feels like there's a nice balance of things that can happen in the Star Trek universe as well.
That's the power of a good television show, because especially once the computer effects got stronger, they could tell bigger stories, especially in like Deep Space Nine, where they were able to get some of the big set piece battles later in the Dominion War. But I mean, even then, you're able to have essentially a two-person show in a closet. Duet is a great episode with basically just two characters in a room going at it, and to be able to have that kind of drama one week and then have like a big action-packed space battle the next week. I mean, that just shows you the breadth of stories that you can tell within the Star Trek universe, all throughout the timeline. So lots of possibilities.
So, what is it about that era in particular, right? I think that the Deep Space Nine, Next Generation era of Star Trek sings to a lot of people. Like I said, I don't consider myself like the world's biggest Star Trek fan, but I've seen tons of episodes of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. I know that for the role-playing game you guys are putting forth as well, there is a fair amount of material that's going to take place during this era. What do you think it is about that era that speaks to so many people and makes it a good place in particular to set a role-playing game?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know that I've really thought about it that closely, because my default assumption was that that's kind of the most familiar territory for the last couple of generations. Next Generation came out in '87, and then DS9 came out in the early '90s, and then Voyager came out in the early aughts, and then of course we got Enterprise. But I think the general populace is probably more familiar with Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager than they are the original series, which is a shame, because the original series has some great episodes, and it's of course the foundation on which it was all based. But I think setting the default setting of the role playing game is 2371, so it's right at the end of Next Gen, but right in the middle of DS9 and Star Trek Generations, the feature film. So that's just a good year, because a lot of stuff is happening, and it's just before the Dominion War. So it's a great jumping off point for new crews and game masters and players to jump in with their ships to do something, especially once the Enterprise is destroyed on Viridian 3 and through Generations. Starfleet is kind of without a flagship for a little while, and it's a great opportunity for new crews to come up and kind of make their mark on the galaxy. But as far as what makes Next Gen, DS9, Voyager such an appealing setting versus like Enterprise or the original series, I don't know that I have a good answer for that, because it's just it may be because the original series we had 79 episodes, right? So 3 seasons worth of episodes and then a bunch of movies. But with the Next Gen era, you've got 7 seasons of Next Gen, 7 seasons of DS9, and 7 seasons of Voyager. So you've got 21 years worth of episodes, and that's just, there's so much depth and detail into all of like the Romulans and the Klingons and the Cardassians. There's just so much depth there that it just makes it takes the original series setting and just add so much depth to it. And for a role playing game in particular, you really want that depth, because it gives you so many more tools to play with. Of course, at the same time, we're also trying to expand the horizons, right? And I'm really trying to push writers on the adventures to really get away from Klingons and Cardassians and Romulans and try to create new aliens, new species, new worlds, and really start pushing the boundaries of what we know and don't know. Because we have a pretty broad license, and CBS is really great to work with in terms of approvals and stuff. And it's such a huge galaxy that there's a lot of room to explore. We don't have to sit in the tried and true necessarily.
So, this is one of the things I am fascinated by because I also work in television. I write and produce promos for different TV networks. So, I am very familiar, I would say, with the approval process when it comes to working with somebody else's IP, right? And that can get, in some cases, very tricky. And in my experience, working with an enormous network like CBS and saying, like, hey, we're going to have this organized play program where we're going to add aliens and stuff could get very sticky. But this is not the first time I've heard somebody say, like, yeah, CBS has actually been great to work with and they've been real open and encouraging. Can you tell me a little bit about what that relationship with them has been like and sort of how it all works?
I can tell you a little bit about it. So I'm not the line manager of Star Trek Adventures. Like I said, I freelance for Modifius, and so I'm involved in a lot of it, but I don't actually deal with CBS directly. But what I do know, and what I can tell you, is that CBS has a dedicated team that manages the approvals for all the different merchandise that comes through the door, whether it's Star Trek Attack Wing or Star Trek Adventures or other games, books, toys, products, etc. They've got a whole team that manages all the approvals process for that stuff. And so all the adventures, all the products that Modifius creates has to go through CBS approvals. And I am a Star Trek fiction writer, so I had some Star Trek short stories published a few years ago with Simon and Schuster, which is currently the one of the fiction licensors for Star Trek. And I am good friends with Dayton Ward, who is a New York Times bestselling author of Star Trek novels, and also Scott Pearson. And Scott Pearson's written some Star Trek fiction, but is also a freelance editor and copy editor. He does a ton of work for Simon and Schuster on the Star Trek line. And so when I saw them at a convention we go to every year last year, I said, "Hey, do you guys want to get involved in this Star Trek Adventures game?" And they were both interested. And so I got them in touch with the folks at Modifius and got them on board. And because both Dayton and Scott are so very familiar with the approvals process with CBS, and they know that team, pretty intimately, it gave CBS a great deal of confidence in the fact that Modifius was bringing on these people who already know the process and know the drill, and kind of made things a lot easier. So that when we send documents to CBS for approvals, there's not a lot of questions about the content, right? Because we scrub the manuscripts before we send them to CBS. We scrub them to make sure that they're canonically correct and that they fit the overall mood and theme and feel of Star Trek, right? We're not going off on some weird tangent where you're never going to see a Star Trek crew that's addicted to drugs on a long-term basis. Maybe a one-time episode or something, but like the team that's working on Star Trek Adventures knows Star Trek pretty well. And the cleaner we make the documents before we send them to CBS, the easier it is for CBS to approve the documents coming back. So sometimes it shortens the approval process. But now that we've been doing it for about a year, I'm pretty confident that they are confident in what we're doing as far as writing and preparing things, and that makes the approval process smoother. Whereas if we were sending them like terrible manuscripts that they would have to spend weeks, copy editing and revising and putting notes on, then that would just make the whole process more complicated.
Absolutely, which I think is always the fear, right?
Right.
So it sounds like one of the things you guys do is you yourselves are very good partners and know your stuff, which I think is awesome. So you've talked a lot about this. You sort of have this dynamic where you work on games, but then you also work on other fiction. I was wondering if you could get a little bit into sort of the difference between writing for games and writing then other works of fiction.
Sure. So writing fiction, of course, when you're writing a short story or a novel or whatever, I mean, you're creating prose and you're creating a story, and you're presenting that story to a reader. You're trying to get into the reader's brain and engage them in different ways. But writing a game adventure is very different because you have a very different audience. A reader of a game module isn't just going to read it and passively say, "Oh, that was a good story," because once the players and the game master get into it and change it around and mutate it, and the dice start hitting the table, it has the potential to become something very, very different. So a game module it does have to tell a story from beginning to end, right? And especially for Star Trek. But it has to be written differently because you're not presenting a story. Here's what happens. Here's what happens. Here's what happens. you're kind of you're writing a story and you're saying, under ideal circumstances, here's what would happen. But if things go sideways, then, here's some suggestions on how to morph it and change it. And, ideally, here's what the end result's going to be. But, how you get from A to Z might be very different than how another game group will get to A to Z. And that's part of the appeal of writing RPGs, is that you don't necessarily know what's going to happen once you release it out into the wild. Because two game groups will take the same adventure and have extremely different experiences. And as a game writer, I love that, because I love getting feedback from gamers and GMs who are like, oh, I played this adventure and this happened and this happened and this happened, and I sit back and I listen to that and I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of that. And then I'll think about that for the next one I write, and maybe try something a little bit different. So fiction writing and game writing are similar, but really very different because of the audiences and the intended use of the product once it's in somebody's hand.
Yeah, it really is very different, which is awesome to hear you say and hear you talk about sort of how different those things are. So let's get sort of down into the nitty-gritty. The system of Star Trek Adventures is really, really fun. We actually have an actual play on our network if people want to check out. It's on a podcast called Don't Split the Podcast Network Presents, or DSPN Presents, to keep it simpler. So if you check out DSPN Presents, we've got our 4-part Star Trek Adventures actual play. Super fun, an amazing good time. A guy named Chris Sneezak ran everything for us. He's an amazing game master who's familiar with the system. Really, really fun. You've got this sort of mechanic where you're essentially adding up various attributes that you have, maybe in an attribute and a skill and a specialization within that skill. And then you're rolling a particular number of D20s based on the complexity of the task. And you want to be under that sort of number that you've created. So you're sort of, obviously the better you are in these various skills, the higher you can roll on the dice and still succeed, right? It's a really great, pretty simple, easy to pick up system. Do you know how sort of this system was created, and how do you implement it then in adventures? Like, when is the right time to use these things?
When's the right time to use the system?
Like in an adventure, what are some examples of maybe that you would use this system?
So my understanding of the history of the 2D20 system, and I'm not 100% clear on it because I don't do a lot of the actual hardcore mechanical work. That Nathan Dowdle is the primary mechanics guy on 2D20, and I think he did a fantastic job on Star Trek and Conan and a couple other games. But I think it was Jay Little who developed the Fantasy Flight game Star Wars system. I think he came up with the initial concept of 2D20. And there are some similarities between the two systems, but since then, it's been changed and morphed. And like the Conan version of 2D20 is a little bit different than the Star Trek version, which is a little bit different than a couple other versions. I don't remember the other ones. I think Mutant Chronicles uses 2D20 as well, but they all use 2D20. So for Star Trek, we modified it to make it really easy to pick up. And it's deceptive because there's 6 attributes and 6 skills. And then, and you add those two together, that creates your target number. You roll 2d20. You're looking to roll under that target number based on a number of difficulties that the game master sets for a task. And then where it gets more complex is the fine details, where you have focuses that can make certain things easier. You have character values, like what's important to your character that can be challenged. And that's really getting into the role playing and the character development that's so important for Star Trek. Versus other games that are out there. But as far as using it in an actual game scenario, anytime a character is going to be tested to do something, whether they're trying to repair a control panel or fix an engine or shoot at the bad guys on the other starship, or they get into a hand-to-hand combat where the Klingons are going after the Jem'Hadar, or the Federation's getting involved into fisticuffs or whatever, that all comes down to the different tasks that you're trying to attempt. And that's where you're looking for what's the most appropriate attribute, what's the most appropriate skill, and then you roll and go from there. One of the things I really love about this game system that I haven't seen in that many other game systems is that in any given task, you're not locked down into using one specific skill or one specific attribute. There's some flexibility, so you can kind of play with it a little bit. So like if you're attempting a task, maybe one person would use their engineering skill where somebody else might use a science skill and come at it at slightly different angles depending on their character and the situation. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you actually approach a problem. Whether you're like being daring to do something, or you're being more careful, or you're being more cautious. There's some flexibility in what attributes and skills you're actually using. And as a writer, you need to just kind of come up with the baseline and say, this is probably going to be a reason plus engineering task. However, the caveat is always that the game master and the players can kind of discuss it and say, well, it might make more sense for my character to use sciences here or medicine here or something else. And the game system allows for that flexibility.
I do think that's great because it also allows, it enhances the creativity of the players. And I do think like one big hallmark of role-playing games and Star Trek, right, is creative problem solving. And so it's great to see that built into the system, that the system inherently encourages people to do that. I think it's really fun to see like these are the wacky ways we use science to solve problems. To me, is part of Star Trek, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to admit, though, just to play devil's advocate, that's also a challenge of the system. I keep an eye on a lot of the gaming forums, mostly RPGNet and Modiphius's boards and a couple Facebook groups and some Google Plus groups. And I know that one of the common themes that I've seen come up recently as the game continues to get out there into the public and gets more people playing it is that a lot of gamers are uncomfortable with how creative it is and how flexible it is because they're like they want concrete examples of values and directives and how do I do this and how do I do that, and it's like they're nervous to really be creative and to really take that next step to get away from some rule sets that are like here's 30 game books that have all the information that you need to do these tasks exactly this way. And to get away from that and say, here's one simple rule set, which is really encouraging you to be creative and be flexible. And I've seen some hesitation on a lot of players' parts to really embrace that creativity and just to jump in with it with both feet. And I think that's something we'll continue to try to push on game masters and players in upcoming adventures, to really try to encourage them to think not so much outside the box, but just to take the tools that we've given them and really go crazy with them and have fun.
That's really fun. I like that a lot. It could be, right, like a challenge of the system, but I do think once the game gets played a couple of times, people sort of start to catch on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think the brand itself then is a way in. People are going to want to play this game because of the brand, and hopefully you get them used to a system with maybe some more open and more fluid rules that are simple and allow for greater flexibility in role-playing, which is great. Right. There's a lot of systems out there that do that I think you're right, people get scared of for the same reason. Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
Gather round, travelers, to hear our tale.
A mysterious organization called the Sisters of Sorrow have swept up our three heroes, and it is up to Kara, Saye, and Arnadel to do battle with the forces of evil and financial destitution.
We shall battle with ancient lore.
Take them down with our sharp reflexes.
Hey, did you guys finish the last of the ale?
Venture Maidens is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition actual play podcast featuring a cast of 4 lifelong gamers.
Kara, not now. We're recording a podcast ad.
Right. I chop it with my axe.
For gold and glory.
We post our episodes every other Sunday. We've got monsters, treasure, role-playing, a cool plot, and some strange NPCs. Find the Venture Maidens podcast today on iTunes or wherever podcasts are free. Until then, venture away.
All right, back to the show. Another thing your system does great is, it allows for teamwork and it allows for flexibility within the mechanics beyond, like, looking for interesting combos, right? I think that there are sort of some built-in teamwork mechanics
right.
that work really well. I'm wondering if you could talk about those a little bit.
really, you watch any episode of Star Trek, you're going to see somebody working together with somebody else to solve a problem. That's really one of the core tenets of Star Trek, is that you're not out there in the galaxy all by yourself. You have a team that you're working with, whether it's one pilot and one co-pilot, or there's a whole crew on the bridge, or whatever. There's always a team kind of atmosphere that you're trying to accomplish things together. And so that was baked right into the core of the game itself, is that Star Trek fundamentally is about people going out together to explore and working together to discover and to explore and to search and to research and to expand their horizons as a group. So the game really encourages and rewards you for working together and working as a team, taking the lead on a task and having support. That kind of stuff was really built right into it from the very beginning. Again, that's another place where there's a lot of nuances to the rules that I think people are just starting to figure out, and that we can continue to explore. The teamwork aspect is really key, and I know that a lot of games don't really have that, because you're really kind of like in some games you've got each person kind of has their role, and they do really, really well at that role, but they don't necessarily work together. Like you wouldn't necessarily see a fighter and a rogue work together to do something. They're kind of like, they kind of got their own shtick, and they work well together as a team. But the fighter's not necessarily going to help the rogue pick a lock, and the rogue's not necessarily going to help a fighter shield bash somebody. So very, very different atmosphere.
I think you're absolutely right, that there's some great things going on that are really fun. And obviously you guys looked at Star Trek quite a bit for this. Are you just constantly like inundated with Star Trek in different ways? Did you have to go back and watch a lot of Star Trek to get ready for this? Sort of, what was the research like?
So like I said, I mean, I've been living Star Trek my entire life, and I don't watch a lot of modern television. I mean, I cut the cord not too long ago for cable, so I don't actually have regular television anymore, or cable or anything. But I always, like, even when I'm writing or working or whatever, I've always got a Next Gen or TNG or DS9 episode on in the background just for background noise. But yeah, as soon as I got involved in the Star Trek Adventures game, I immediately sat down and rewatched all of Next Gen, and I'm almost done watching all of the original series again. And I've got Enterprise DS9, queued up, ready to go now. So it's just constant inundation of Star Trek. I've written some short stories. I've read a lot of the novels. I've got a huge library of reference material that has been coming out, really for the last 30 years or so. Once Next Gen came out, and Next Gen and DS9 were on the air together, and then DS9 and Voyager were on the air together, there was just a wealth of nonfiction, like, resource material that came out, like the technical manuals and the encyclopedia and the chronology, and there's just so much great material out there now, especially because the 50th anniversary was last year, the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and there was just a ton of great products that came out that are nonfiction essentially, and not game specific, but there's so much great material in there that you can steal it and use it in a role playing game, like again, like the technical manuals, just wealth of material that you can fold into a role playing session and have it feel like Star Trek. And we don't have to necessarily write all that detail into the game itself, because all that content's already out there. So it's a really cool time to be writing for Star Trek, because there's just so much great material out there. Not to mention the new TV shows on the air now as well.
Yeah, totally. Which I am seeing a lot of buzz about, and a lot of people sort of sharing their thoughts and opinions. Seems to me like a lot of people love the new show. Is that something that, if the new show takes off, that you might be using this system to maybe create some content for that era of Star Trek as well?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I am not the authority, and I don't have any concrete information, so take anything I say with a grain of salt. But my very limited understanding is that Discovery is so new, right? There's only, I think, the 5th episode just came out, that they don't actually have licenses for a lot of stuff yet. Like, I think there's a toy license, and there's a fiction license, because a couple novels have already come out for the Discovery. But as far as a game license, I'm not sure that there's actually a game license yet, because there's not even enough material really for a RPG. So I'm willing to bet that if Discovery goes into a second season, which I think it probably will, at some point maybe CBS will have an RPG license for Discovery, And if that happens, then certainly if Modiphius pursues it, or if they already have pursued it, I don't know. I can't speak to that. But sure, it's part of Star Trek, and I haven't actually watched it yet. But my understanding is it's part of the Prime, the main universe, not the J.J. Abrams movies, but the actual main Star Trek universe. And I know there's a lot of fan angst about that. But if Discovery does well and they want, CBS wants it to be part of the RPG license, then I'm sure somebody, if not Modiphius, then somebody will develop it at some point. I can't speak to whether Modiphius will or not. I just don't know yet. I think it's too early.
Totally. Thank you for speculating with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to speculate all day.
So you're talking about a lot about adventures and things that are making. You're helping shepherd along, and shall we say, in charge of the sort of organized play program, as well as putting out some adventures for just general consumption. What has that process been like, and what can you tell us about the organized play program?
Yeah, sure. I got involved with Star Trek Adventures early. It must have been early last year, like January, February last year, when we were starting to develop the core book. And we wanted to develop a living campaign, sort of organized play sort of thing, somewhere along the way. And so we kind of started developing that. And again, Dayton Ward and Scott Pearson, they presented us with a fantastic premise for a living campaign that we've since taken and expanded on. And what we're doing with the living campaign is that is it's a detailed storyline that's going to tell an epic story over the course of several seasons, and it's kind of on two tracks. There's an original series storyline that's happening in 2269 with the USS Lexington, which is a original series Constitution class ship that discovers some amazing things and then goes on to continue to explore it. And then there's a parallel storyline in the next gen era starting in 2371 that kind of picks up from that. And it kind of weaves in together and plays with it. And what we're doing is we're releasing an adventure for that every month, or approximately every month, one for the original series and one for the next gen. And as that storyline continues, you'll see it change and morph and really get interesting. And what we're trying to do, because it's a living campaign, every month when we send out an adventure, we also send out a short survey to the people that have signed up for it. So asking some specific questions. And the intent is that as the living campaign continues, it will be influenced by the actions that the players and GMs have been making within their own adventures. So like if a certain NPC is killed frequently enough in a given scenario, we won't continue to use that NPC in future scenarios. It will, that will be a repercussion that takes place through the campaign. So the campaign itself will change and morph as more players and game masters get into it, which is really exciting because as a writer, we're like, we're going to throw this at them and see what happens. And based on what happens, we'll change it. And so it's kind of crazy sometimes, but we're having a lot of fun with it. So that's one track is I'm partly responsible for the living campaign adventures that we're releasing every month. I'm also responsible for the standalone adventures, and These Are the Voyages version, volume 1 is a standalone adventure book that came out just recently. It has 8 adventures in it that are set throughout the Star Trek universe that game masters can use to either drop into their campaigns or use as a standalone adventure or as a playtest or as a jumping off point for a new campaign. And so what I'm doing is I'm taking pitches from prospective authors and approving the ones that are good, or not so much good, but the pitches that look workable as a game adventure go on to be approved into drafts. The ones that are rejected, don't move on. A lot of times I see a pitch and I'll ask the writer to make some adjustments, maybe brainstorm some different ideas, give them suggestions on how to make it a little bit different from 100 other pitches that I've gotten. Like, I've had 30 pitches for Borg stories, and we don't want to do a lot of Borg stories because that was really kind of Next Generation's thing. Getting a lot of pitches, you see a lot of similar themes coming up. So I try to encourage prospective writers to really kind of expand their horizons a little bit beyond the low-hanging fruit, and that's just a process of knowing the IP and really trying to encourage writers to get more creative, because we're really trying, like I said earlier, we're really trying to push the boundaries of the final frontier and give folks the realization that writers the realization that we don't have a budget to worry about as far as like visuals. Like a TV show and a movie has only so much money that they can spend on special effects and makeup and props and that kind of stuff. But when you're writing fiction or you're writing a game, you can come up with literally anything you want. And if you want some crazy alien with 100 tentacles that glows in the dark and phases through walls, then you can do that in a game because you don't, it'll cost us a little bit of money to make a piece of art for it to put into the book, but like we don't have to worry about an art budget necessarily to how are we going to make this happen in special effects land, because it's all going to be in the theater of the mind, as it were. So it's just encouraging the writers to really get big and get creative and hit the sense of wonder and hit the wow button and do some really cool science fiction as well.
So since we're talking about pitches and we're talking about writers and all of these amazing, wonderful adventures that you're putting out,
Yep.
What are the elements? Obviously, you've talked a lot about creativity and you want to see new stories, which I think is amazing, right? That you're going to get to play some original content, that you're going to meet original aliens and go to new worlds. Like it feels like Star Trek, right? Like it feels so fun and unexpected, and you don't know what you're going to meet, and it embodies this spirit of bold exploration, which is amazing. What are the sorts of things that you're looking for in a Star Trek adventure? What are some of the Star Trek adventures that you guys have put out that you're proudest of, that you think like, yeah, this is a great Star Trek adventure?
Oh, well, I'm really proud of all the ones that made it into the These Are the Voyages book. I just think there's some great ideas in there, and some of the ones I'm working on now that I'm getting drafts from writers are really cool. I don't really want to talk about them yet because I want the players and the game masters to be surprised when we start dropping this stuff on them, so that they can really just get a sense of like how cool some of these stories are. I mean, even some of the pitches that I've received. Pitches are kind of tricky though, because you get a pitch and you're like, wow, that's a great idea, but then you're always kind of like, oh, so is the author going to be able to execute this in as wild of a fashion as the pitch is? Like a 500 word pitch is like, okay, this can be pretty cool. But then when you expand it out into 10,000 words for an adventure, it's like, can you sustain that kind of, wow, this is really cool for that much longer of a time? And that's part of my job as an editor too, is to make sure that happens, right? But by and large, the writers are bringing that fire, at every page as much as they can. So I love them all. I don't have the book in front of me to really pick out a favorite, but my group is playtesting a couple of them and just running through them, and we're just having a load of fun with the different possibilities that are out there. So a great Star Trek adventure, front and center, involves the players, and I know that's challenging to write for, but if you watch any Star Trek episode, it's about the crew. It's not necessarily about the guest star who shows up and outshines the crew and then you never see them again. It's really about the characters. So when you sit down to a game session with your friends playing Star Trek, you want the story to be about your captain, your science officer, your medical officer. You don't want to be necessarily outshone by some NPC that shows up and tells you how wrong you are and how awesome they are, and then you never see them again, and then you sit around the table like, why did we just play that game? Because it didn't change my character. It didn't teach me anything new. So like I think the ideal Star Trek episodes, Star Trek adventures, are front and center about the characters that the players and the GM are bringing to the table. So the writers really need to make sure that anything that happens in the adventure has to involve the players' characters directly somehow. So whether it's they run into a hostage situation, but it's not just that they're having to deal with the hostage situation; it's that they themselves have been taken hostage and have to, So there's a certain amount of personal involvement that it's not enough that they're just experiencing something that, or they're not just witnessing something that's happening; they're experiencing it. They're into it. There's a plague on a planet, and it's not enough that they're trying to cure the plague. It's that, oh no, one of their crew members has been infected by the plague and is in fact dying, and something else is happening. So it's not just that they're trying to save this population, they're trying to save themselves. And how does that change a person? How does that influence their values and their perspectives? And how does that make for a great role-playing experience when it's not just the other guy who's in trouble, it's actually you as well. So I really want to see adventure pitches that really focus on how the events of the story are affecting player characters themselves, because really that's what we're getting. That's what we're coming to the table to do, is to play a game, and how does it affect me and my fellow crew, basically. Again, like I said, I'm encouraging writers to think outside the traditional Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, the standard aliens that you see. I mean, obviously, we want to have some touchstones to what's already known, but we also want to really push writers into creating new stuff and just populate the worlds that we haven't seen yet. It's a big galaxy, and the Romulans don't always have to be the same, the main adversary. They're pretty common in Next Gen and TNG and Voyager, but let's see some more stuff that's out there. So I really try to do that. Lately, like I said before, having seen probably 300 or 400 adventure pitches over the last few months, I see a lot of common themes. We've gotten just a ton of pitches about alien races, alien technology, alien species, alien, ancient technologies, that kind of stuff, which is a great common theme. And clearly it's something in the cultural zeitgeist beyond Star Trek that is an interest to a lot of people, not, outside of Star Trek. But you have to be careful, because you don't want to do adventure after adventure after adventure that involves an alien species and ancient technology. You want to get more of a variety going, like you would see on a Star Trek show like Next Gen or the original series, even, where you've got something different every week. You tune in every week. It's the same crew, but they're dealing with wildly different situations and circumstances. So trying to, again, that's coming from me as a editor, is that really trying to encourage prospective writers and people that are pitching ideas to really just get more creative as much as possible.
So let's get into one sort of other aspect of the system. We talked a little bit about complexity. The complexity of the task determines how many dice you're rolling. What happens if you roll, let's say you have a complexity 5 task, a very complex task, and you roll 3 successes but 2 failures? How does that work?
Well, so the way the system works is, so you have the game master sets a task for a situation, and say maybe it's a very, very difficult task. Maybe it is difficulty 5, which is at the upper end of the scale. A player attempting that, they start off with their 2d20. They can buy additional d20s to roll up to a certain point, up to a maximum of 5, I think, if I remember right. But then with teamwork, they can get some people to help them as well, so they can attempt a certain number of successes. And if they don't roll enough successes, then they've potentially failed the task. And it's partly up to the game master as to does the failure mean that they failed and that's the end of it, or what we try to encourage is like, okay, you failed, but that doesn't necessarily mean the end. It means maybe there's a complication, or there's a situation, or something else has come up. There are some mechanics within the game system that kind of help players out a bit in terms of like you have determination points that you can spend under certain circumstances to either completely re-roll your dice pool. This is a good example. So, for instance, last night my friend is running a Star Trek Adventures game, and my character was attempting to talk down a Klingon from doing some terrible harm to a prisoner who was unarmed. And so it was a difficult 3 task, and I bought myself into 4 dice into my dice pool. So I figured, with 4 dice, I've got a pretty good shot of getting 3 successes, given the way the system works. But I failed miserably. I failed the entire roll. It just completely, it was a cold dice night, and I completely botched it. And I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I've completely failed this roll. And so I said, well, this is the one case where I do have a point of determination. One of my values is Starfleet to the core, which means that I'm going to hold to my ideals and tell this angry Klingon that, look, it's not right there's no honor in attacking an unarmed prisoner. And so I spent the point of determination as per the rules, and I was able to re-roll that entire dice pool. So through the mechanics and through the role playing and my character's values, I was able to turn a disaster into an opportunity, and actually pull my butt out of the fire and actually manage to succeed at the roll the second time. That won't always be the case. I mean, sometimes good people fail and you have to deal with the consequences. But I think the game itself is set up that you can't necessarily fix stupid actions, but the game's not going to kill you just for being stupid, right? Like, the conceit is that the main characters of the game are like the stars on the TV show. They have a certain amount of script immunity, but I certainly wouldn't expect a game master to go easy on somebody just because they had or just because they made a stupid decision. But if you have bad dice luck one night, there are some mechanics that will kind of soften the blow a little bit. But what that does, though, is it creates complications for the storyline, which hopefully makes it a more richer, interesting experience as you're sitting there at the game table.
Nice. That is so excellent. Man, it's just such a fun system, and I feel like you guys have really captured Star Trek well, at least in this non-fan's mind.
It's really a very different gaming experience, and I love. I've been gaming forever, so I love D&D and I love Marvel superheroes, and there's so many other games out there that I love to play and GM. But Star Trek has always been a little different from every other game that I've ever played, just because of the values and the character role playing and the storytelling that you can do, and the whole teamwork. It's such a very different experience. Me personally, it's just something that really appeals to me. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a whole campaign where you're you meet in the bar and you knock down some castle walls and you go kill all the orcs and stuff. I mean, I love doing that. But I've had, without a doubt, over 30 odd years of role playing. Like, the best role playing experiences I've ever had have always come from a Star Trek game.
Well, that's great, and it's great that they found you to help design this game, because sounds like that is the person I would want designing my game as well.
Yeah.
So, Jim, where can people find you on the internet?
So you can go to my website, www.scribeinetti.com. That's SCRIBEINETI.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the Modifius boards, RPGNet. I'm in the places that you probably be expected to find, but all the links are on the website, scribeinetti.com. You can see my fictions on there, my nonfiction, my gaming stuff. I don't have a lot of gaming stuff on there because I've been so busy lately that I haven't really updated my website. I'm on Facebook more frequently, but I'm also pretty regular on the different gaming forums, specifically for Star Trek Adventures, because this is my only freelance gig right now. Because it's keeping me very busy, and really it's my dream RPG job right now. So I haven't really felt a need to branch out to other stuff right now. But so please stop by, say hi, ask questions, and if you are interested in Star Trek, please, if you're interested in writing Star Trek, please pitch ideas to me. Send me an email, james_w_johnson@hotmail.com. Shoot me a pitch, shoot me an idea, because I talked to my friends in the Star Trek writing world, and I am pretty confident that right now Modifius's Adventures is the only Star Trek licensor that is open to unsolicited pitches. Like all the fiction and nonfiction, I believe right now you need an agent to pitch books and story ideas. So Modifius, I'm pretty confident, is the only one that's taking unsolicited pitches from fans like you and me. So if you want to have a shot at getting your name into a Star Trek product, this is probably the best way at the moment to do it. So send me your ideas, man. Everybody.
There you go. That's excellent. Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Well, thank you very much for the invite. I love your podcast, and I love what you're doing for the industry, and I hope to see much more of it.
That was awesome chatting with Jim. He is really incredible. Tabletop Babble is still a new show, and you can help us grow by going to iTunes and leaving us a 5-star review. Seriously, even if you don't listen to the podcast through iTunes, many podcatcher applications use the iTunes algorithms to recommend podcasts to other people. So go create a free account, leave us a review, then go to your other favorite podcasts and leave them reviews too. It is huge and does not take too much of your time. In fact, to encourage you to do just that, I will read one new 5-star review verbatim each episode and credit the person who left it. You can make me say anything at all you want. Today's review is entitled Great Recruiting, and it is by Mumfrey. Sorry, I was going to read that as Murphy, but it's Mumfree999. And Mumfree999 says, James Introcaso always manages to bring together a great group for discussion on the week's topic and keeps the show flowing and everyone engaged. Well done. Well, Mumfree, thank you so much for this review. I very much appreciate it. People, you can follow me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can check out my blog, worldbuilderblog.me, for updates about all the game design stuff I'm doing, and a bunch of free extras for various RPGs, a lot of 5th edition D&D stuff, a little Shadow of the Demon Lord, a little Mutants and Masterminds, it's fun stuff. So check it out, worldbuilderblog.me. Also, I want to take a moment to talk to you about the Don't Split the Podcast Network. There's tons of amazing shows on DSP. And if you like Tabletop Babble, you should definitely check out the DM's Deep Dive. It's where Mike Shea of the website Sly Flourish and the author of Sly Flourish's Fantastic Locations, Sly Flourish's Fantastic Adventures, and many other great products. You might have heard of the Lazy Dungeon Master. He sits down with amazing guests and chats about one topic, does a very deep dive. People have been on this show. Maybe you've heard of them. I don't know, a guy named Mike Merles who helped invent 5th edition D&D. I don't know, a guy named Matt Mercer. He's got a little show called Critical Role. So check it out. Don't Split the Podcast Network was founded by myself and the amazing Rudy Basso. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by BattleBards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. You'll find a use for the D12 eventually. Hey everybody, thanks for sticking around. We've got one more sponsor I would love to tell you about. Lone Wolf Development, the creators of Hero Lab, are pretty much amazing. Hero Lab, what is it? Oh, it's an interactive character builder that you can use not just for 5th edition, but for 4th edition, for Mutants Masterminds, for Pathfinder, for Shadowrun, for Call of Cthulhu. That's right. If you can think of an RPG, they or their amazing community have probably made the files to support it. You can print your hero and share your hero. You can save your hero to a PDF. There's a validation engine that verifies you've built your character legally. And you've also can bring in homebrew content. So you don't need to follow that validation engine. It's just there for your convenience. What kind of great homebrew content is there? Well, the community's pretty awesome, as I mentioned. So anything from armor to classes to feats to races to spells can be created with their content editor. And their authoring kit allows you to even create your own game systems. That was the sound of my mind being blown. Check it out. It's got D20 Pro and Fantasy Ground support that will allow you to import your characters directly from Hero Lab. You can find out more at getherolab.com. That's getherolab.com. Tell them DSPN sent you.